Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today we're taking a shortcut to getting you well informed on a really significant topic, Arrowhead Pharmaceuticals. We've got a stack of crucial investor questions here, and our mission is basically to unpack the most important insights for you.
That's right. And for this deep dive, we've actually leveraged a cutting-edge AI research assistant. It's called OnPoint. Now, it's important to say it's under independent development, not affiliated with Arrowhead Pharmaceuticals at all. But it's generated some, frankly, incredibly timely and comprehensive answers to the kinds of questions investors are asking right now.
Okay, great. So you can think of me as your guide asking the key questions today.
And I'll be sort of channeling the distilled insights from OnPoint for you.
Perfect. Let's get right into it then. Okay, let's unpack this first crucial question. We've got the November 18th, 2025 PDUFA date coming up for Plozasiran in familial chylomicronemia syndrome, or FCS. What exactly is Arrowhead's commercialization strategy here? How ready are they? And, how do they plan to ensure strong initial uptake and market access in what is, well, a pretty rare disease?
Right, and this is a big one. Plozasiran for FCS marks Arrowhead's first potential independent commercial launch. So their go-to-market strategy is absolutely critical. First, looking at the regulatory side. The NDA went in last November, got accepted in January, and that November 18, 2025 PDUFA date is, that's the date.
And no AdCom meeting planned?
Correct. The FDA is not currently planning an advisory committee meeting. That usually helps streamline things. Plus, it's got breakthrough therapy, orphan drug, and fast-track designations from the FDA, and orphan drug status, plus accelerated assessment from the EMA in Europe.
So lots of regulatory tailwinds, basically.
Exactly. Those aren't just labels. They mean a potentially quicker path, maybe some market exclusivity, more FDA help, big advantages. And they're not stopping at the U.S. Plans are already moving for Canada, Japan, and the U.K. approvals in 2025, too.
Okay, regulatory path seems clear, but how are they actually positioning Plozasiran, especially for this small, rare disease market to start?
Yeah, so Plozasiran is seen internally as the, quote, primary near and midterm value driver. They've even called it a pipeline within a drug. The strategy is very much staged. Start with the small FCS market. We're talking fewer than 1,000 diagnosed genetic FCS patients in the U.S. That's the cornerstone, their entry point.
Makes sense. Prove it there first.
Right. Then expand into severe hypertriglyceridemia, SHTG, around 2027. That's a much, much bigger pond, like 3 to 4 million people in the U.S. with triglycerides over 500. And potentially down the line, mixed hyperlipidemia or even broad ASCVD after a big cardiovascular outcomes trial. So building a whole franchise.
A very logical phased approach. So thinking about that initial Q4 2025 launch for FCS, what are the concrete steps? What are they doing now?
They're definitely building. Commercial leadership, sales and marketing teams, market access folks, medical science liaisons, they're largely in place. The national sales director is actively hiring the field force right now.
Okay.
Medical affairs is busy too. Lots of scientific exchange, getting trial results ready for publication. And for patients, they're setting up the specialty pharmacy network, the patient hub system. They've even launched new patient resources, and this "We'll Get There Soon" campaign.
Patient focus is key in rare diseases.
Absolutely. And critically, they're talking to payers. Active engagement there, and apparently there's encouraging interest, especially around reducing triglycerides and, importantly, acute pancreatitis risk.
Yeah.
Oh, and they've started an early access program, EAP, for patients from the Palisade trial and other eligible FCS patients, even before formal approval.
Getting it to patients early, good.
Yeah.
And internationally.
Yeah, they're building a field medical presence and starting that scientific exchange in Europe, too.
Yeah.
Laying the groundwork there.
So the infrastructure is coming together. What makes Plozasiran actually stand out? How do they convince doctors and payers to use it, especially right out of the gate?
Well, OnPoint highlights what it calls a best-in-class profile. The headline number is really the dramatic triglyceride lowering. We're talking about an 80% reduction from baseline by the first month, and that's maintained for a whole year. Deep, persistent reductions in APO3 and TG levels.
80% is significant.
It really is. And clinically meaningful, too. Over 2/3 of patients got their TGs below 880 milli-GDL. Nearly half got below 500 milli-GDL in the 25 milligram dose. And this ties directly into reducing acute pancreatitis risk that was statistically significant in the phase 3 Palisade trial. They're even planning a dedicated study, SHASTA-5, specifically to give payers more data on that pancreatitis endpoint.
Okay, that pancreatitis angle feels like a really strong differentiator, major complication in FCS.
Exactly. It addresses a huge unmet need. Beyond that, the dosing is just super convenient. It's quarterly, 4 injections a year. That helps massively with adherence.
Yeah, quarterly is attractive.
And the safety profile looked good, largely similar to placebo in the trials. It shows better TG lowering than fish oils, better durability, and maybe safety than older ASO tech. Compared to Ionis' Olzarsen, another RNAi, Plozasiran is quarterly versus monthly, and they claim it's like 3 to 4 times more effective than Vascepa.
Strong positioning. And the finances to back it up.
Yes, that's key. The recent Sarepta collaboration, $825 million upfront, provides really solid financial footing. It funds Arrowhead into 2028, supports this whole commercial strategy without needing to raise more equity right now.
Okay, that sets the stage nicely for the first launch. Now let's broaden out. This is where it gets really interesting, potentially much larger markets. Beyond FCS, what are the updated timelines, the data strategies for Plozasiran moving into severe hypertriglyceridemia, SHTG, and also for Zodasiran in homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia, HoFH? What should investors be watching for here?
Right, these are the significantly larger opportunities OnPoint emphasizes. For Plozasiran in SHTG, there are 4 phase 3 trials running. SHASTA-3 and SHASTA-4 are the big global ones, randomized, placebo-controlled in patients with TGs over 500. MUR3 is a supportive trial, mainly for safety data needed for the supplemental filing. And then the SHASTA-5, that outcome study focused on acute pancreatitis we mentioned. It's starting soon, but importantly, it's not gating for the SHTG regulatory filings. It's more for payers. They're saying they're on pace to fully enroll SHASTA-3, NAGA-4, and MUR3 this summer, so mid-2025. That points towards study completion sometime in 2026, which means an sNDA filing, a supplemental filing, likely late 2026 or maybe early 2027.
And launch for SHTG.
Projected for 2027. Remember, the phase 2 data was strong, up to 74% TG reduction at 24 weeks in SHASTA-2. Over 90% of patients got below 500 milli-GDL. The commercial potential here is huge. Estimates are like $2–3 billion a year just in SHTG, given those 3–4 million U.S. patients and not many great options currently.
Wow, okay, a major expansion. Now, switching to Zodasiran for HoFH, what's the status there?
Zodasiran is phase 3 ready for HoFH. They've submitted briefing documents to the FDA, expecting that end of phase 2 meeting very soon. The plan is to start enrolling a year-long phase 3 study this year. It'll compare a 200 milligram quarterly dose versus placebo.
And the main goal there is LDL-C lowering.
Yes, lowering LDL-C is the expected approvable endpoint, and the phase 2 Gateway study showed really profound durable reductions, something like 48% LDL-C reduction with that 200 milligram dose, plus good effects on ApoB, non-HDL, TGs, even LPA.
Impressive, especially in HoFH patients who are tough to treat. So, launch timeline for Zodasiran.
A potential launch in HoFH could be as early as 2028, maybe 2029. And again, it's a stage strategy.
Yeah.
HoFH first, then likely heterozygous FH or HeFH, and eventually maybe the broader ASCVD population. They plan to leverage the sales infrastructure built for Plozasiran, which makes a lot of sense. Synergy there.
Building a whole cardiometabolic powerhouse, it sounds like. What about a cardiovascular outcomes trial, a CVOT? That's the big prize, but also a huge expense.
It is. And Arrowhead is definitely considering a CVOT for either Plozasiran or Zodasiran to target that massive ASCVD population. OnPoint mentions they actually have a protocol ready to go.
Yeah?
But yeah, it's a huge capital commitment, so they're waiting for more clarity on additional capital before pulling the trigger. That decision will be a major one for investors to watch.
Okay, so tying this all together, what are the absolute key milestones investors should have circled on their calendars for these bigger indications?
For Plozasiran and SHTG, watch for full enrollment of SHASTA-3, 4, and MUR3 this summer. Then, SHASTA-5 initiation. Study completion in 2026. The sNDA filing late 26 or early 27. And the SHTG launch in 2027.
Got it. And for Zodasiran?
For Zodasiran and OCO-F, initiation of that phase 3 study this year is key. And then eyes on potential launch in 2028 or 2029. Generally, you always want to watch for any regulatory updates, safety news for either drug, particularly around what OnPoint calls open items or silent zones.
Can you clarify that? Open items, silent zones. What does that mean practically for investors?
Sure. An open item might be something like, will acute pancreatitis data definitely be included on the Plozasiran label? It's a known question awaiting an answer. A silent zone could mean a period where there's less public info, maybe because they're deep in talks with the FDA about something specific for Zodasiran, for example, like a public quiet window. Basically, these are areas where news or lack of news could signal important developments or potential hurdles, so worth monitoring closely.
Right, makes sense. Okay, shifting gears again, let's talk about potentially massive markets. Obesity. Arrowhead recently started phase 1/2A studies for ARO-ALK7 and ARO-INHBE. What's the plan here? Target populations. And crucially, how might these RNAi candidates compete against the current giants, the GLP-1 agonists and other emerging treatments?
Yeah, this is Arrowhead moving into the very hot, very crowded obesity space with their RNAi tech. It's ambitious. ARO-INHBE started dosing in its phase 1/2A back in December 2024. ARO-ALK7 got clearance in New Zealand, and they expected dosing to start Q2 2025. A key point On-Point highlights is Arrowhead believes they're the first to actually bring these specific targets into human clinical trials.
First-in-class potential. How are these early studies designed? Especially thinking about how they might fit with existing drugs like the GLP-1s.
Both are pretty standard phase 1/2A dose escalating designs, safety, tolerability, PK, PD in obese adults. Part 1 is monotherapy single doses, then multiple ascending doses. For ARO-INHBE, the single dose part is done. Multi-dose cohorts are enrolling now. Part 2 is where it gets really interesting. It's combination therapy. They're testing multiple doses with tirzepatide, a major GLP-1 GIP coagonist.
Ah, combination. So not necessarily trying to replace GLP-1s, but maybe work with them.
Exactly. They're testing the combo in obese patients, both with and without type 2 diabetes. And those ARO-INHBE combo cohorts are already enrolling. It suggests they see a role in potentially complementing or enhancing current therapies.
Okay. Beyond just making sure it's safe, what are they looking for in terms of efficacy, even this early? What hints might we get?
Primary goal is safety, of course. But the secondary and exploratory endpoints are really what investors will watch. Things like change in body weight, waist circumference, body fat percentage. But also, crucially, fat mass versus lean mass measured by MRI. That's a big one.
Why is the fat versus lean mass distinction so important here?
Because a major criticism of some current weight loss drugs, like the GLP-1s, is that patients can lose a significant amount of muscle along with fat. Arrowhead's preclinical data hints that their approach might preserve lean muscle mass better. That would be a huge advantage. They're also looking at liver fat, lipids, glycemic control.
And when might we see some initial data?
Initial data for ARO-INHBE could possibly come by the end of 2025. ARO-ALK7 maybe shortly after that, potentially also some single-dose data by year-end 25. Earlier estimates were maybe H1 2026, so it seems things might be moving a bit quicker.
Okay, end of 2025, early 2026 for first looks. Now, the big question. Competitive advantages. Why might these work or offer something different than the GLP-1s?
Several potential advantages highlighted by On-Point. First, it's a totally novel mechanism, targeting pathways involved in fat storage and adipose tissue, genetically validated targets. ARO-INHBE reduces activin E, which signals fat storage. ARO-ALK7 silences ALK7, involved in energy balance and fat tissue, different from incretin mimetics.
And that muscle preservation point you mentioned?
Yes, that's probably the most talked about potential edge. Preclinical results suggest they might reduce body weight and fat mass while preserving lean muscle mass better than GLP-1s. The ARO-ALK7 surrogate, for instance, cut fat mass by 50%, but kept lean mass in obese mice models. Addressing that muscle loss issue would be significant.
Definitely a key concern for patients and doctors. Anything else?
They might fill other gaps, maybe fewer GI side effects than GLP-1s. The combination approach suggests they could allow lower, better tolerated GLP-1 doses while still getting good weight loss, maybe with that better body composition, and dosing frequency. Expected to be quarterly subcutaneous for ARO-INHBE, maybe even less frequent for ARO-ALK7 like every 4-6 months. Preclinical NHP data showed deep knockdown for up to 9 months from one shot.
Quarterly or less frequent dosing would be very attractive. Okay, let's pivot to the money. Financial stability is obviously critical. That Sarepta Therapeutics collaboration was huge. What's the updated financial picture? Cash runway, and how are they allocating these funds strategically?
Yeah, On-Point underscores that the Sarepta deal was truly transformational for the balance sheet. It closed back in February 2025. The headline was $825 million upfront. There was $500 million cash, plus Sarepta bought $325 million worth of Arrowhead stock at a nice 35% premium.
Significant upfront payment.
Very. And there's more. Another $250 million coming in annual $50 million installments over 5 years. Plus, potential near-term milestones up to $300 million tied to the ARO-DM1 study cohorts, which they seem on track for within 12 months.
So over $1 billion in near-term cash and potential payments, roughly.
Roughly, yes. And then you have the potential future milestones. Hundreds of millions per program for development, hundreds of millions more for sales milestones. The total potential deal value could top $11 billion, plus royalties up to low double digits. It's a massive deal.
Okay, so what does this do for their cash runway?
It materially strengthens the balance sheet. The bottom line is they're funded into 2028. And importantly, on point notes, there's no current need for further equity raises. That removes a major overhang for investors and lets them focus on execution. It fully supports that Plozasiran global launch and advancing the other late-stage trials.
How does this huge influx of capital and the partnership itself change their strategy or business model?
It really allows them to balance their model effectively. They can partner assets that aren't core to their main focus, using that non-dilutive funding to invest heavily in their wholly owned programs. This means an increased cardiometabolic focus, more spending on Plozasiran, SCS, SHTG, potentially ASCVD, and Zodasiran dyslipidemia. These are clearly the main value drivers now.
And Sarepta takes on some costs.
Exactly. Sarepta assumes the clinical development responsibility and the costs for a whole suite of muscle and CNS programs transferred in the deal. This significantly reduces Arrowhead's own future R&D spending growth, freeing up capital and bandwidth.
Which specific programs went to Sarepta?
It's a bunch of the muscle and CNS ones: ARO-DX4, ARO-DM1, ARO-MMP7, ARO-ATXN2 for ataxia, ARO-HTT for Huntington's, ARO-ATXN1, ARO-ATXN3, plus options for up to 6 new targets in those areas. Sarepta has deep expertise there, so it makes strategic sense, allows Arrowhead to really zero in on cardiometabolic.
What about manufacturing? Does Arrowhead still play a role?
Yes, they do. They'll continue to manufacture the clinical supply for those Sarepta programs. And they're also manufacturing for their own current clinical programs. This helps utilize their manufacturing capacity and cover some overhead costs.
Smart use of assets. Are they planning to partner other programs too?
Yes, the plan is to eventually partner other non-core programs outside the Sarepta deal, like ARO-RAGE for inflammatory lung disease, ARO-PNPLA3 for liver disease, ARO-C3 and ARO-CFB for complement-mediated diseases, again, to raise non-dilutive capital and maintain focus.
So what's the long-term financial outlook now? Does this set them up for profitability?
On Point suggests this sets Arrowhead on a potential long-term path to profitability. They're really well positioned now. Independent launch of Plozasiran coming in 2025, potential for multiple partner launches later. It supports their ambitious 2025 goal, aiming for 20 clinical stage or marketed products by 2025. Diversification helps manage risk.
You mentioned other capital sources besides Sarepta.
Right. They still expect non-dilutive money from existing deals with Amgen, Takeda, GSK, Royalty Pharma as milestones hit. They've brought in almost $1 billion from BD historically. Plus, last August, they secured a new $500 million senior secured credit facility with Sixth Street Lending, structured to be repaid from future inflows. And they monetized part of the royalty stream for Amgen's Olpasiran to Royalty Pharma for $250 million up front. So multiple financial levers pulled.
Okay, very solid financial footing. Finally, let's look further out towards potential long-term value drivers in the central nervous system, CNS. What's a strategic roadmap for Arrowhead's CNS platform? We hear about ARO-MAPT for Alzheimer's and ARO-HTT for Huntington's entering the clinic this year. What are the goals, near and long term? And crucially, what are the big challenges in getting RNAi drugs into the brain?
Yeah, the CNS expansion is a really significant strategic move. It's driven by their proprietary TRiM platform, targeted RNAi molecule extending it beyond the liver, which was their traditional stronghold. The roadmap is about tackling tough CNS conditions, often untreatable or poorly treated, where there's strong genetic validation for the target.
But getting drugs into the brain, that's the age-old problem, right? The blood-brain barrier. How are they approaching that?
They have two main approaches On Point discusses. First is using their optimized CNS targeting TRiM platform for intrathecal delivery, or IT. That means injecting directly into the cerebrospinal fluid. Preclinical work shows this gives potent mRNA reduction, gets broadly distributed in the brain and spinal cord, hits the right cells, and it seems to last a long time, suggesting maybe quarterly or even half-yearly dosing. ARO-ZOD1 for ALS was the first program using this IT approach.
Okay, direct injection. Works for some things, but maybe not ideal for very common diseases like Alzheimer's. What's the other approach?
This is the potentially game-changing one. A next-generation CNS platform designed for subcutaneous delivery that can cross the blood-brain barrier, SC delivery. The idea is a simple injection under the skin, like insulin, could deliver the siRNA systemically, getting it across the BBB. It uses TfR1 binding tech to achieve this. Preclinical data shows it gets into deep brain regions and achieves significant mRNA knockdowns. This would be huge, much more patient-friendly, especially for common diseases.
Subcutaneous delivery across the BBB, that would be massive if it works reliably in humans. So the specific programs using these platforms, Alzheimer's and Huntington's.
Right. ARO-INHBE targets the tau protein implicated in Alzheimer's and other tauopathies.
Right.
Preclinical data looks good, deep knockdown for months in non-human primates. Arrowhead anticipates filing the CTA for ARO-INHBE near the end of 2025. They currently plan to keep this one wholly owned.
Okay, and Huntington's.
ARO-HTT, targeting the Huntington protein. This one is licensed to Sarepta as part of that big deal. It's also on track for a CTA filing around the end of 2025. Preclinical data using that SC, BBB penetrating approach showed it could effectively target deep brain regions and reduce the HTT protein.
So near-term goal is getting these into the clinic. What are the longer-term ambitions for the CNS platform?
Key goals. First, achieve clinical proof of concept, especially with that new subcutaneous BBB penetrating platform. That would be incredibly disruptive, potentially opening up treatment for millions. Second, rapidly expand the CNS pipeline. They have multiple other preclinical programs, including ARO-SNCA for Parkinson's, with more CTAs expected late 25 and early 26. Ultimately, they want to tackle previously undruggable neurodegenerative targets, leverage a first-mover advantage for Siran in the CNS, and contribute significantly to that overall 20 and 25 company goal.
It sounds incredibly promising, but what are the fundamental challenges they still have to overcome here?
The primary challenge remains the blood-brain barrier itself. Sirnas just don't cross it naturally. While IT delivery works, as you said, it's invasive and maybe not practical for widespread chronic diseases like Alzheimer's. Getting complex biologic drugs like Sirnas effectively past the BBB systemically, it's been called the Holy Grail for a reason. Arrowhead's subcutaneous platform is their big bet to finally crack that nut. Success there would unlock immense value.
And there you have it, a pretty comprehensive deep dive into Arrowhead Pharmaceuticals, all filtered through the insights gathered by OnPoint. It's really clear, I think, that from the near-term commercial launch of Plozasiran to these potentially groundbreaking new programs in obesity and CNS, there's an awful lot for investors to think about.
Indeed. It really showcases how targeted RNAi is evolving, moving beyond the liver into these new, challenging frontiers. What's really fascinating, I find, is that strategic balance they're trying to strike. Leveraging the established platforms like Plozasiran for near-term revenue, while simultaneously pushing the scientific boundaries in CNS and obesity for that potentially huge long-term growth.
It certainly gives you a lot to chew on, doesn't it? I mean, the potential ability to systematically get drugs into places like the brain, which were previously off limits, or to tackle complex diseases like obesity with maybe fewer side effects like muscle loss. It really makes you wonder how fundamentally could these RNAi approaches reshape medicine in the coming years? And, what completely new possibilities might that unlock for treating diseases we currently struggle with?
That is definitely something to mull over until our next deep dive.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Arrowhead. Stay informed and stay curious.